Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Vandy Sports Podcast. Here's your host, Chris Lee. Commodore fans, on your feet. It's time to anchor down.
Welcome to the Vandy Sports Podcast presented by Dr. Jody Jones, DDS. We're part of the 440 Sports Network. I'm your host, Chris Lee. Our guest today is Will Perdue, former Commodore great. We'll talk some football and basketball-related topics on today's show, which was recorded on Thursday afternoon. The guest line is presented by Michael Kendrick of the Kendrick Group. Michael is a local carpenter and a lifelong Vandy fan. He builds bookshelves, cabinets, picture frames, furniture, and other made-to-order items, including a display case for my prized Dale Murphy jersey. I've seen Michael's work. He's a true craftsman. If you're in the market for custom woodwork, give Michael a call at 615-830-9458. Now on to our episode with Will Perdue. Will Perdue joins me today. Will, welcome to the show. Of course, if you were listening, you know Will is one of the greatest basketball players ever to play at Vanderbilt. Of course, he was on the Chicago Bulls world title teams. And more than that, though, Will was a communication major. Not communications, but communication at Vanderbilt, which may come in more handy today for this podcast than any of those other things. Welcome to the show, Will.
Oh, Chris, it's good to be here, but let me throw this out there so everybody fully understands before we get started and take a deep dive into football, close with basketball, and call it a podcast. There was a professor at Vanderbilt University who basically saved my ass from me basically and honestly failing out from Vanderbilt and having to go elsewhere. I struggled mightily with discipline, priorities, and budgeting my time my freshman year at Vanderbilt. I was distracted by a lot of things that most freshmen are distracted by.
No.
But I was, being an athlete and not having the free time that most students have, I got behind the eight ball early, and I kept getting farther and farther behind. And I thought I wanted to be an engineer, so I started off in civil engineering. And like most people, the reason being that's what my father was. He worked at the Kennedy Space Center, and I thought that, okay, that's the path I want to go down. Remember, when I stepped foot on Vanderbilt, the thought of playing professional basketball never entered my mind. It was play basketball at a great school like Vanderbilt, get a top-notch education, play in the SEC, allow my parents to, see me play because of the SEC network, and also have them come to Nashville every year for the Christmas tournament, which is a family-oriented tournament for all the families of the players and something that we all dearly look forward to. But all of a sudden, that was all in jeopardy because of my grades. And a female basketball player by the name of Dana Turner, I'm pretty sure that's her maiden name, who's now Dana Reese, has been married to Steve Reese, who I played with and was in my freshman class back in 1983 when we walked off campus. Said, hey, you need to talk to this professor by the name of Kasan Kowalczyk. He was the head of the communication department at Vanderbilt, and she felt like that's something that I would really enjoy. She was a communication major as well, and she set up the meeting, and the rest is history. He said, obviously, he was very transparent. He didn't say it in these words, but he basically just said, obviously, you're not built to be an engineer. Your schedule probably doesn't allow it if you're going to continue to play basketball. So let's figure out what you can do. Let's take a couple speech classes. Let's take a couple of other classes, decide what you like, readjust, and put you down the right path. And that's exactly what I did. And I enjoyed the communication and speech classes more than anything. I ended up having that as my major. It took 5 years. Luckily, CM Newton was very kind and redshirted me. And, as we say, the rest is history, and it's the best choice I ever made. So, and I think it's benefited me as well because I did an internship at a radio station. I did an internship at a TV station. I always thought I wanted to get into advertising or television or radio or, some form of entertainment. And my NBA career allowed me to mature and wait 13 years before I actually got into my real profession as a basketball analyst. How about that?
But let's be real. You really know you've made it when you're a regular on the Vandy Sports podcast.
Well, yes, exactly. And that allows me.
You're thinking that just goes without saying, right?
That is correct. But also, I'm very fortunate that it allows me to express my passion for Vanderbilt athletics and all sports.
Well, speaking of all sports, we've got a couple to talk about today. The Stackhouse basketball extension is a hot topic. We'll get to that at the end of the show today. Will and I were both on pretty tight time schedules. We've got about 40 minutes total to do this. So we may get to that or we may not, but we are certainly going to talk about Vanderbilt football using your learned degree in communication. You have analyzed Clark Lea's press conference as you do every week. What did you take away from that?
Well, I like how, first and foremost, he makes no excuses whatsoever. None. And I like that because that's the mindset that the coaching staff has. And I know that they've told the players that that's the mindset they have to have, specifically if they want to play at Vanderbilt. There's no excuses. Okay? And I like how he talked about this. Listen, we knew going into this stretch, Alabama, Ole Miss, Georgia, that it could be ugly. And it was. So the mental toughness and the belief of these players is being challenged at this very moment. And what I mean by that is that, games like this can kind of shake you to the core. All right. They're going to test you about how bad do you really want to play football at Vanderbilt. Because as he said, they've done an excellent job, in my opinion, of keeping things in perspective. We don't think they're going to beat Alabama. We don't think they're going to beat Georgia. Maybe Ole Miss, maybe slim chance, but you don't expect it. But now, how do you take these 3 games? And I think you were the one that asked the question about, is this a Burnham tape? They don't do it. This is the hard part of being an athlete is that when you watch film, it's the truth. You can't hide from it. You slide down in your seat, but it's right there and it smacks you in the face and says, pay attention. So the question is, can you take these beatings, the failures, and pick up and move forward and learn from it? And that's what's going to be tested as they step on the field against Missouri. I promise you, Chris, that every player in that room, when they get together for these team meetings, fully believes they can beat Missouri. I'm willing to bet, whether they'll admit it or not, they didn't fully believe they could beat Alabama or Ole Miss or Georgia. And that's just being realistic. That's having smart kids standing in front of you. I don't think Clark bullshits. I think he puts it down and he believes what he says, and he's not going to lead them down the yellow brick road. So they knew what was ahead of them. But now the best part is this is behind them. So again, how do they pick up? How do they move forward? Yes, their character's being tested, but they have to be fully focused and ready to play on Saturday, regardless of the past.
This last game, I know everybody expected this. It was a thing we talked about before the season. that these were going to be tough games to win. They probably weren't going to be close. And a lot of what happens this season really is based on their reaction to that. It is one thing to stand outside that and look at a box score or, after the fact, or even know going in that it's, I guess is a better way to put it, that it's going to be that way. It's another thing to watch it and to look at the box scores afterwards. And I think that's where the fan base is kind of stuck.
Well, and that's understandable. I get it. But the interesting thing to me in that press conference was, and I had this told to me by a couple former Vandy players. We're on text threads. We're talking. I haven't been able to watch a lot of these games live, but I've recorded them all, watched them all. Okay? And I love how Clark talked about they failed to make the available play on offense. I had more than one former Vandy player, offensive players and defensive players, tell me that they had opportunities to score. They just couldn't capitalize on them. Again, they had opportunities. They could not capitalize on them. And that's what was really frustrating. You could pick up that frustration in Clark's voice from that Georgia game. He wasn't talking about winning the game. He was talking about the opportunities that they had that they needed to capitalize on. They didn't do it. That doesn't change going into the Missouri game. They're going to have plenty of opportunities, a lot more than they're going to have against Georgia or Alabama or Ole Miss. Excuse me. But they still have to take advantage of those opportunities because their window for error is so small. Okay? But they all have the luxury that they did not have against Alabama or Ole Miss or Georgia of making mistakes, but yet still being able to recover. Not against Alabama, not against Ole Miss, nor Georgia can you make those mistakes and recover. But against Missouri, and let me take it one step farther, against South Carolina, you don't have those opportunities. So that's where the mental toughness comes in. Because as he talked about, make the available play on offense, right? But also capitalize on opportunities on defense. Their inability in the red zone when I think he said there were 4 scores on third downs for the Bulldogs. And I love how he talked about it wasn't just an execution situation. He used the word, it was about design and execution. Design is on the coaches, execution is on the players. So he's not just sitting here saying this is a player's issue. This is also a coaching issue. They need to design better plays defensively, but they also need to execute better. Meaning everybody needs to be on the same page. You have to trust that the coaches are putting you in the best position to succeed, and you got to continue to believe in yourself and this program. And this is where you get into this part of the season, whether it's baseball, basketball, football, team sports, to determine what your mental makeup is. Are you in or are you out? And that's where we talk about at the professional level, the college level. Players eventually make decisions for the coaches because of how they act, how they react, okay, and how they respond. And that's where you start to see shakeups in rosters. You start to see some people drop in transfer portals, things of that nature. And that's where, it's the constant evolution of a program. And that's where Vanderbilt is at the moment.
Before we get into the mailbag and access some other topics that I wanted to get to anyway, I'm hearing, I think the portal and the ability to keep the kids that they found, recruited, and have developed up to this point on campus is maybe a bigger concern than who they're able to recruit. I'm just curious if you've heard anything like that and what your thoughts on that might be.
No, I mean, first of all, the coaches want kids that want to be there. Okay. Now, it's one thing for a recruit to step up and say, I want to be there. But what does that guy say, and how does he feel after his freshman year when he's now knee-deep in the culture? He sees who his teammates are. He sees their approach. He sees their belief. He sees their work ethic. You know, he looks at the coaching staff. He looks at the design. He looks at the ability or inability of a team to execute offensively and defensively. Does he still want to be there at that point? And this is the hard part for Coach Lea and his staff. This is the hard part for Jerry Stackhouse and his staff, and Corbin, Shea with the women's team, because quite honestly, Vanderbilt has some challenges that other places just don't have. Okay, but that's not an excuse. And this is where I'll use an example where Greg Popovich and R.C. Buford did such an outstanding job for the San Antonio Spurs organization I was part of, identifying individuals, not necessarily the most talented individual, but identifying players that fit into the culture, the scheme, the attitude, the mindset that the San Antonio Spurs wanted to play. When you hear somebody say, well, we didn't play Spurs basketball, that's what they're looking for, the guy that they can plug in and fits, right? Plug in and play. Jerry Krause did the same thing with the Chicago Bulls, finding the pieces to play around Michael Jordan to not only make him successful, but to help him and the organization win championships. Jerry Krause wasn't liked by a lot of people, but he didn't care. He was just doing his job, and he pissed off a lot of people doing his job, but he didn't care because of what he was trying to accomplish. And that goal was to win a championship, and he ended up winning 6 of them. So Clark Lea is trying to do the same thing, because the head coach is the general manager and the coach and the president and whatever. He's got. It's just not just, hey, it's Clark Lea. He's the head coach of the football team. He wears so many hats. It's amazing. All right, but it's also hiring the right coaches, which obviously he's done an excellent job with, because other universities in the NFL keep calling and plucking away, at the talent that he's put on his staff. But there's also chemistry involved, and they have to continue, to develop that chemistry. So that's a challenge that he's got to find answers to. But we talked about, and I said this at the very beginning, Clark doesn't make excuses. He's talking about, and one of the things he talked about that was so disappointing about the Alabama game, the Ole Miss game, the Georgia game, was not problem solving on the field, right? And to me, that's maturity and that's experience. But also the ability of the coaches to solve the problems as well. Don't think about the mistakes. Think about the answers to those mistakes. And how do you correct those mistakes? So, it's something that this team is dealing with, and it continues. And he said it. Ultimately, the losses reflect where we are as a program and the product we're putting on the field. So he can't be more transparent to the guys that are on the team, to the fan base, to Candace Lee and the athletic department. And he's saying that we still have a long way to go, but we need your help. And when he says we, he means he needs the continued support from the fans and the patients, which is the hard part, because every coach that comes in asks for patience. But it's been a while, I think, since we can honestly say, as former athletes and fans, that we're really starting to believe that they have something here, something that's sustainable, not just short term, but sustainable. But he's also sending a very vivid and poignant remark to Candace Lee and the Vanderbilt and to I'm drawing a blank. What's the president's name? I apologize.
Daniel Deermeyer.
That there's still a long way to go. Okay? Don't settle for mediocrity, right? Facilities, money, if you want to be specific. We've just seen the tip of the iceberg. But we think it's sustainable. We think they're going to get better. We think they're going to get competitive. And, I've taken a beating watching these games, but I will say that I enjoy watching them because I've seen improvement. I think we've got a quarterback that we could build an offense around. And, now we just have to do a better job recruiting. We got to get more talent, specific talent, because this is still the SEC and nobody feels sorry for you. And just continue to make steps forward. Baby steps as it is, but progress.
I think one of the ways that he's building his culture, and this is just my interpretation, that they create an environment that nobody wants to leave. You don't think about leaving for somewhere else a lot of times, and maybe you do. I don't know. There's so much tampering now that maybe you're perfectly happy where you are until another offer presents itself, which these things do present themselves. I don't care what rules are written. It's even happening in baseball now to a degree where it's fairly blunt. But what I'm getting at with this is I think he's trying to do that. Obviously, they sell the degree, the experience. Winning is a big part of it, though. And they're sitting here with a 26-game losing streak in the Power 5. The next highest, I think, is Virginia at 7. So, the gulf between him and the rest of the Power 5, at least from that, is pretty massive. But where I'm getting with this is, I don't know, and I'm not taking a stance on it, either coming down on the kid or the coaching staff, but in the midst of the culture they're trying to build and what they're trying to do and getting kids to take the long view, I was surprised Rocco Griffin did what he did, which is come in basically the night of the Ole Miss game, say, I'm done here. I'm moving on. I want to keep my red shirt and transfer out. I did not expect that. Now, I thought that Rocco deserved more playing time than he was getting. I thought that he should have been second in line for carries behind Patrick Smith just after the events of this year. But I also don't know, all the variables. I know that he'd been hurt and all those other things. But what I'm getting at is, what did you make of that transfer at that point? Because Rocco is, by all accounts, a good kid. Seems like he's a good student. All the things that you would want your program to represent. In fact, I think it's him that's on the poster, on their schedule poster that's hanging from McGugin, the one that's like 10 feet tall or whatever, that's hanging on the wall of the football building. I think it's Rocco Griffin that is on that poster. With all those things, and I know I've given you a lot, what was your reaction to that departure, and what, if anything, does it mean?
All right, so first of all, unfortunately, I went straight from doing a podcast for the NBA because, as everybody on here knows, I do pre-half and post for NBA games here in Chicago and NBC Sports Chicago. And I already watched the press conference. I took notes. So I'm a little fuzzy because I'm going to pat myself on the back for a second as soon as I take a step back and ask for your help. What is the current running back's name that's had the best season?
Before I answer that, one correction. That was not Rocco Griffin on that poster. I think it was John House. At least that's okay. His wearing number 22. The current situation, and that's the other piece to it. Ray Davis is the one. Patrick Smith got the reps as the 2. And they don't have any other healthy scholarship backs right now. Jace Gillespie was hurt the day of the Ole Miss game. I don't think made the trip to Georgia last week, so I don't know if that is a health thing or preserve the red shirt thing or what. But any way you slice it, they are really low on scholarship running backs.
Right, but to pat myself on the back, occasionally we all like to do this. It's egotistical, but just so the listeners understand that I take the time and I do the research, and yes, I take pride in this. This is a passion, but I just don't spout out a bunch of bullshit and then, move on. I try to be accurate. I try to be correct. I mean, when you're opinionated, you're not always accurate. You're not always correct, but I always try to make educated decisions and opinions. I think I may have mentioned in our very first podcast, or maybe the second podcast, that I had been hearing rumors that Ray Davis was looking really good in training camp. And that it's my definition of a breakout because he is getting a majority of the snaps. And even during the games, as you talk about, Chris, the commentators and the analysts are talking about, why is Rocco not getting more touches? Why is Rocco not getting more, why is he not playing more? Why are you not alternating? I don't have the answer to that. But to your specific question in regards to how surprising that was, this is the issue I have with the transfer portal. Because this is, to me, just, again, my opinion, it's just going to get a lot of pushback. This is more a societal issue as well. And this is something, as a father with a freshman in college at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio, that I am very scared about, is the way our society has changed. Kids, in my opinion, people younger than me, when I say teenagers, 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds, feel like they should be rewarded before they've actually put in the work. Now, I'm not saying that Rocco hasn't put in the work. I think he's put in the work. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. But also, if this would have been me, and I don't know this for a fact, Chris, I haven't asked anybody about this. I'm being very transparent and honest. But it comes across as, I'm not getting as many touches as I want. I'm not playing as much as I want. So I'm moving on. And maybe it's a very educated decision on his part because he sees the writing on the wall, and that's not going to change. Maybe he's had a private conversation with, the offensive coordinator and the running backs coach, and they've been very blunt and said, this is the direction we're going because we feel like this is the best player for us to attach our trailer to. And he didn't like the answer, and because of the transfer portal, he's allowed to move on. But I don't understand it. I would actually take the opposite route and accept the challenge to prove everybody wrong, specifically the coaches. Because there's that inner joy that you get when somebody tells you can't do something, specifically your coach, and you do it because you so badly want to say, I showed you, or I told you so, or our society is, we want to scream from the mountaintops, you were wrong, I am right. But yet it's just the ability to just do that, but also the respect you gain from your teammates by doing that. Because of how the saying is, you just, nose to the grindstone and just do the work and flip the script. But I don't know the whole thing. I just know the approach that I would take. But at the same time, what Rocco did was also make things easier for the coaching staff and them not having to go to him and say, hey, you're probably better off going to the transfer portal, and we'll gladly release you and allow you to do so, or however that whole process works, right? Because he doesn't want to be there. And those are the kids you don't want.
This season of the Vandy Sports Podcast has been made possible by my friend Dr. Jody Jones, DDS. When it comes to general or cosmetic dentistry services, Jody is the best in Nashville. Just check out his client list. It testifies to that. He sees movie stars, music stars, athletes, coaches, you name it. Jody is the dentist of choice for stars in Nashville, but he sees regular folks like you and I as well. What people love about Jody's office is the ambiance. It's relaxing, it's friendly. Someone described it to me as a tooth spa. Whether your needs are general or cosmetic, go see Jody today. Call him 615-270-2322. See him at 55 Music Square East, not far from downtown or the Vanderbilt campus. Jody is a former Vanderbilt football player and a huge Commodore booster, so go and talk Vandy sports with him while you're there. Go see Jody Jones today. Thank him for his support of this podcast, because without it, this season would not be possible. Okay, I've got about 11 minutes before I've got to hit the transportation portal. So let's go to the mailbag.
Let me ask you a quick question.
Sure.
Yeah, let me ask you a quick question. Give me your answer. Go into the mailbag, and we'll tie a bow on this thing. But I mean, do you think that answer is too harsh? Do you think that answer is unrealistic that I gave?
No, I don't. In fact, I was thinking.
I don't think that you do, but I'm just asking to get another perspective.
Well, Will, to be honest, when you were giving your answer, my mind was going in a half dozen different directions, because, and I'm like, well, if I comment on it, we may not be able to get the genie back in the bottle in time for to end the podcast and get to people's questions. I have the bigger answer, and I'm sort of sidestepping your question. I have so many issues with college athletics right now. And look, I was for this whole thing of being able to pay kids. I just never liked the idea that a kid could, go get a handout, get a steak dinner after he's made his school a lot of money. And if the NCAA catches you, that's illegal. I didn't think that was fair. I also think that the combination of that with the portal has been disaster. I think it's time to rethink everything and put some limits around those things. I think eventually you're going to need something along the line of contracts, limits that kids at a school can earn. If you're going to have any kind of competitive parity and keep the kinds of coaches in the game that we need to have in the game, coaching young men and women. I just have, it's sometimes when you put rule on top of rule without blowing the whole thing up and starting over, you have huge issues. And that's what the NCAA has now. I don't think that answered your question at all. It's just kind of part of the whole situation as it is right now. And I mean, we could do 2 more hours on that alone.
Yeah, I think the best way to put this is, and we'll move on. Currently, right now, the NCAA is using duct tape and trying to use a bigger hammer, and it's not working.
They don't even have Flex Seal. I mean, that thing stops every leak known to man, according to what I see on the constant commercials. Maybe that's the issue, but
right.
Anyway.
All right, let's get to the mailbag. I'll try to be
let's
as
see.
distinct and direct as possible.
Well, and I'll try to direct the questions appropriately to allow you to do that, which means we may have to omit some. But anyway, our mailbag is sponsored by Sutherland and Belk, a family-owned injury law firm. If you or a loved one has been hurt in an accident, give Taylor or Russell a call at 615-846-6200. See what your rights are and if they can help. Maybe the NCAA should have called Sutherland and Belk before they got into this. But anyway, okay, I'm going to go. Okay, because I think people are going to want to hear your thoughts on this. And so I'll just let you go with this where you may. Harley Hog 44, was it the right thing to do with the contract extension for Coach Jerry Stackhouse? Does this really help with recruiting?
Well, I think it does help with recruiting, but I think that they're, and I don't know what the expectations are on him, but I am a little surprised by this because how big of a year this is for Jerry Stackhouse and the men's basketball program. It's a huge loss in Scottie Pippen, but I still think that we've seen improvements in talent. We've seen development, not as much as I would like, but I think that Stackhouse has come in and righted the ship and pointed the program in the right direction. But I think this is a huge year to where I think that they need to take a huge leap, even though they lost Pippen. I want to be very clear. I understand that. But this is now his fourth year. And, usually the third year is the big year. We're still waiting for that four-letter word to pop up. And it's not really a word, but NCAA.
I think it is a four-letter word. But
is it actually a word? But it's just...
You're the communication major here.
We need to get back to the tournament, and we need to get back to the tournament to where that's the expectation. We make it to the tournament and lose in the first round is a bad year for the program. I know we've never been there, but I think we've proven that they've had the ability to get there. Can we find the coach that can keep us there? We don't know if Stackhouse is the answer or not. But again, this is a huge year for the Vanderbilt men's program.
Yeah, I've got a lot of thoughts on that. I've got some background. I'm going to unpack this. I think I will do it with Luke Wyatt on our Monday podcast because I think when I'm able to bounce off the background of why I think this happened, I think he'll be very insightful. But I'll tell you what I think, and I'm not 100% sure. I've got a couple reports, and some of the details are a little conflicting. I think what Vanderbilt has done is put Jerry Stackhouse on a contract that runs for 6 more years, including the one that's about to happen. And I think most, if not all, of that salary is guaranteed.
So, which is huge for him, surprising to me, but that means that that's who they're going with. So, again, the fact that actually happened prior to this season, it totally caught me off guard. I did not expect to see that, much less even hear the conversation of a new contract. So, the one thing that comes with new contracts is new and bigger expectations. And I understand this is Vanderbilt, but the one thing I love about Clark Lea, no excuses. Look forward, not backward. Instead of making excuses, find answers.
Yeah, and to Jerry's credit, Jerry has not made excuses. I do think Jerry has been his own worst enemy to this point. I do think that Jerry has figured some of that out, which I think leaves me with a little more cause for hope for him than I would have had a year or two. But, man, it's still a long way between 13 and 39 in the SEC, which I think is what he is, and the place that you and I probably both think Vanderbilt basketball should be.
No, you're exactly right. It's behind where we would expect, and as we mentioned, he's now going into his 4th season. We probably expected this team to be in a little better place than it has been. But I also think that I'm just going to be quite honest. I think some of that is ignorance on Jerry's part about the confidence he has in his abilities and what he thought he could do with this program. But also it's a misunderstanding of probably what he thought he was taking over and where the program was at that time. So I think he has, if he doesn't know, he better figure it out real quick. But, that's a good sign in the sense that he still wants to be here. He feels like he can correct it, and he can get this program back to where we all feel like it should be and maintain that success.
Yeah, I don't hear as much of the he's looking to get out talk now than I did the first couple years. I think Jerry would have easily gone for an NBA deal, and I think he still would, which is kind of part of the. I think they're really sort of bidding against themselves on this deal, because I think if Jerry gets an NBA head coaching job, he's leaving regardless. But
but what we don't know, Chris, is how this is described, how it's terminated. He may have a very affordable buyout. It's hard to say, and that's the thing with Vanderbilt being a private institution. Trying to find out this information can be very difficult. It's not a public university. It's not Tennessee. It's not Kentucky. So getting that information, sometimes is almost impossible unless somebody wants to voluntarily give that up.
Yeah, I don't think he's going anywhere for a while. Again, I would have been surprised he'd made it this long a few years ago. I think things have changed. I think he's fairly happy here. He gets basically what he wants. He gets along with people behind the scenes over there. I don't think the NBA is coming for him anytime soon, having talked to people that are pretty well connected in that league. Again, he's not taking an assistant's job, and I don't think there's other schools barking down, or knocking down his door for him to get hired at other Power 5 jobs. So I think that, unless something changes there, I think that Jerry Stackhouse is going to be Vandy's coach a while.
Yeah, I think you're right. So, hey, do we have time for another one before we got to go?
I'm afraid we don't, because all the questions left are rather meaty. They don't lend themselves to 15-second answers, and I've got to be somewhere in 15 minutes. So for that reason, I'm going to shut the mailbag down, and perhaps we get to some of those things next week.
All right, so let me close it with this. In his press conference, Clark Lea basically put up the recipe for success for this Vanderbilt team moving forward for the rest of this year. They can't afford to get off to a slow start. This team is not built to play from behind, and they can't have that many snaps defensively. So that means going into Missouri, going into South Carolina, the offense has to play better. They have to capitalize on opportunities, and they have to do a better job with their design as far as coaches go, both offensively and defensively, and the players have to do a better job executing.
Be good, my friend. I hope we have got a different script in front of us at some point this football season. That would be nice.
Well, I think so, and hopefully for you, the traffic in Nashville is not bad today. Good luck.
Well, it's Cool Springs, and I'll make it. But in any case, just you got to leave yourself a little bit of time. With that, Will, thank you so much, and we will catch up with you again hopefully next week.
All right, Chris, you got it. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. We thank our presenting sponsor, Jody Jones DDS. We thank our other sponsors, Sutherland and Belk, the Kendrick Group, and MyPerfectFranchise.net. If you're interested in sponsoring this podcast, and that's how we make this work, please email me at chrisley70@gmail.com. We also ask that you subscribe to our website, vandysports.com. That is $99 a year. You get things there that you don't get here. And of course, please rate, review, and subscribe where you see our podcast. That helps us get noticed. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at vandysports.com. Follow me at chrisley70. And finally, subscribe to our Vandy Sports YouTube channel as well. Thank you for listening to the Vandy Sports Podcast, which is part of the 440 Network. I'm your host, Chris Lee. We'll catch you with another episode coming very soon.